This is to me, this is kind of an intriguing thing. It's kind of where I think the story should go. Whether it will or not, I don't know. I have to look at where the facts take me. I don't really care necessarily. I don't have a vision as it should be this, it should be that. Wherever it goes, because that way you let the truth or the story kind of dictate where you should be. But the Vikings are intriguing. How in the world would the Vikings get over on the Pacific coast? I mean, they've been up and down the Atlantic. They were in Iceland and Greenland back in anywhere from, I think it's 900 AD to about 1300. So basically, when you look at the northern end of Canada, Hudson Bay and all of that area, we view it as one big solid piece of ice. It's incredibly cold. But what most people don't know is from about 900 to 1100 AD, there was a period of what they call the medieval warming period. And the temperatures were a lot hotter than what they are today, which opened up quite a few waterways that would come through. If you look at the far right, you'll see a red line, and it ends at Greenland. That is what's called the Western Settlement. And in all of Greenland, with the Vikings, which everybody knows that were pagans, this was the only Christian settlement that was there. And as time progressed, people were leaving. The Eastern settlement down at the bottom, they were slowly going away, and their trade route, their ability to keep crops and whatever they needed to survive was gone. So I think they eventually got to a point and said, well, what are we going to do? And I think they decided to go westerly. And it would not take them a week or two to get through this. This would be at least 2 to 3 years. And they would have to, the Inuit Indians that are there, they would have to become friendly with them, because if not, they'd let you die. And there's a Franklin expedition that was out in the 1800s. That's exactly what they did. They had a very strong 19th century English attitude, and the Inuits said, okay, see you. And they died. Jill? This is what I think possibly could be one of the routes. You look at where all the land is and how much water is there. I mean, there's a ton of ways they could go. To me, I think they would have gone around Alaska or through the Bering Strait. If they come down to Vancouver Island, the odd thing with Vancouver Island is they have 6 to 7 foot rock cairns that have absolutely nothing to do with the local inhabitants. They're local Indians, and they have no idea what it is. I think if you were a Viking, you're going to hug the coast. You got to get near water, food. I think they would have hugged the coast as much as they could. And Vancouver may be just one place where there might be some sort of artifact that could prove it. Jill? After Vancouver, they would have again hugged the coast all the way down to California. And at the very tip of Baja, they didn't know Mexico was on the other side. If you're sitting in a Viking ship in Baja, you have no idea that there's land over there. You can't see it. So I think what they did is just hug the coast again and went north. And the last place that the line is at is a place called Tiburon Island. Joe? And again, the Tiburon Island has an old story about the come from afar men. And what they had was these very large, brutish men that showed up, and they basically, the Serie Indians from Tiburon attacked them. And Vikings being Vikings basically laid them out pretty quick. So they realized that these guys were stronger, wiser, and they kind of welcomed them in. There's a lot of people that don't believe this, and the medicine man at the time was a guy called Santo Blanco. And there's a book out called The Last of the Serie Indians, written by 2 authors who were there back in the 40s, and Santo was very old at that particular time. And I think a lot of times, especially with Indian folklore, when the elders leave or die, there's nobody else to carry it on. And 20 years later, nobody knows about it. And I think that story got lost. But according to them, the Vikings took 4 families with them. They headed north. There were 2 boats, and they were never seen again. So, Jill? This is a couple of the Viking stories that are local for our area. Myrtle Botts was a librarian, or the librarian for Julian back in the 40s and 50s. And according to her, she was out during the springtime in the desert. She loved flowers, so she was out taking pictures, and her whole thing was she was trying to find a new species of flowers. And a prospector stopped by, and as they did back in the day, they never invaded your camp, but they were close enough to where you know each other was there. So most of the time, people would say, "Hey, are you hungry? You know, come on over, we'll give you some food." And he did. They struck up a conversation, and he said, "You saw a weird thing, saw a ship high up on a hill." And Myrtle said, "Oh, come on, we have all heard that story." And then he produced a picture. So the next day, she decided to go look for it. And when she looked for it, she actually said she found it. It was about 40, 50 feet up high on a cliff, and it was just sticking straight out. The shields that the Vikings would have on the side of the ship were gone, but you could see a definite indentation that would show that the shields were there. According to the story, as is with every lost gold story, some catastrophe happens. In this case, it was the Long Beach earthquake. I can't remember the year, 1933, 35. It was devastating. And according to her, the ship and half the hill just fell down, and it's buried underneath all this dirt. A lot of people think it's over on the west side next to the Laguna Mountains, but it can't be. There's the water, the height of the land would be way too high for where the water line was. If you look at the Botts campsite, that's near Moonlight Canyon. And if you look at the water line, the blue that you see on the far right, you can go to Google Earth and you can put water at where the water line, where the sea level should be. And as you can tell, there is absolutely no water anywhere near the Moonlight Canyon, which was within a half inch from where it says Myrtle's Botts campsite. But Fish Creek Mountain seems a little strange. This would be the closest place that she could have went to where there may have been shoreline. Though there are high cliffs over there, and also it just makes sense to me. Myrtle had said that it was going to be a long day for them. And Moonlight Canyon was within a half a mile. So if it's going to be a long day, I don't understand why people are looking at Moonlight. I think back in her day, in the 30s, you may have had to drive all the way around to come down, or they went through it, and you know you could get stuck. That could be a hard road to go. So this is something that's brand new that I've come up with in about the last probably couple of months, and I need to get out there to take a look and see if it's actually viable or not. I don't know for sure. It's just the closest area for her with water would be the Fish Creek Mountains. So we'll have to take a look at that. Jill? What, sorry, somebody.
What's the Salton Sea in relation to that map?
The Salton, no, go ahead, Jill. The Salton Sea would be northeast, where the little circles are, probably off the map by about 3 inches. The blue you see there, that's Lake Cahuilla. That's how big and where Lake Cahuilla would have been. You have Moonlight Canyon and Canebrake Canyon, which are two canyons that everybody thought that Myrtle was at. It's just too high of land. Even if the water was 100 feet over the sea level, it's still not going to reach that particular area. So I just don't see where it's going to happen. But could be wrong. Santiago and Petra. Santiago was married to a guy named Jim Tucker. Petra was married to a guy named Jim Tucker, and they were in an Arizona pioneer home. And she was relating a story that her first husband, Santiago, found a ship high in the hills and took one of the shields off and made tortillas out of. That's bunk, because the shields were made out of wood, not metal. But it's a good story. Elmer Carver and Nels Jacobson. This was the one that I look at. Two writers, Harold and Lucille Waite, which basically kept Desert Magazine, the original Desert Magazine, going back during World War II when Randall Henderson, the publisher founder, was off in the war. Prolific writers. They knew just about every lost gold, lost treasure story, and published it for decades. If anybody's been to Calico, you've seen the Calico print, the old newspaper that they used to do. That was a direct thing from Harold and Lucille. If you look on the left-hand side, you'll see where it says Lost Ship of the Desert. That's one of the booklets that they would have. And on the bottom left, right there, that's the Nels Jacobson Ranch. I was lucky enough to find a book that actually had a picture of the actual ranch house. And the story goes is that Carver, which is the guy on the far right with the newspaper, and the other picture is actually Nels Jacobson. And Carver says that he went to the pool hall because that's where everybody went, very similar like going and hanging out at Home Depot and trying to find work. The picture on the bottom left is the actual pool hall in the Imperial El Central area at the time. I was lucky enough to find a audio tape of the interview with Elmer Carver, and I listened to Elmer's voice talking about the story. And he says that he went to the pool hall. Nels Jacobson, who was Norwegian, came in with a very rough Norwegian accent, and Carver was a big guy. So he goes, "You work for me, yeah?" And Carver said, "Sure, you know, it's money and money." So they left and they went in a southeasterly direction for a while, and then they went due east. When they got to Jacobson Ranch, he realized he was a hog rancher. He raised alfalfa and some other stuff as well. And he said, "Okay, we got to feed the hogs, and you're going to be here handling the ranch for a few days because I have to go to LA." When he went up to the hog ranch, he noticed that the boards across the hog ranch were roughly 16, 18 inches tall, 3 inches thick, and about 30 feet long. And he goes, "That's odd. This is not something you would find on a normal hog ranch." So he asked Nels, he says, "Where'd you get the boards?" And he goes, "Oh, I get them from ship." And he thought a guy was off his rocker, so he just let it go. And next day he took Nels to the train station, drop him off. Nels' wife, Annie, went with them. And on the way back, he did his chores, and that night Annie was making supper for him. And she says, "Do you know what Nels went to LA for?" And he goes, "No." He goes, "Well, he's selling all the jewels he found off the ship." He goes, "What are you talking about?" So she went in and got a 3-inch by 5-inch by 2-inch box and opened it up, and there were rubies and diamonds and emeralds, a golden cross made of blue stone. And she goes, "Yeah, this ruby is worth more than anything in the box." So the next morning, Carver goes out to see where the ship is, and there it was. It was roughly 60 feet long. The front end was hanging 6 feet off the ground. The rear end was hanging 4 feet off the ground, or 4 feet off the ground. And it was all tore up because Jacobson was using a lot of it on his ranch. Jill? This is, and I am not going to pronounce this right, Skuldelev. It's also known as a Nar, K-N-A-R-R. This is a typical merchant vessel. It's a small boat. It's about 54 feet long, 15 feet wide. Empty, it only needs about 2 feet of water. Full, it would need about 4.5 feet. You could load 34 tons in it. Basically, 5 to 8 guys would commandeer or run it. And the sail was about 915 square feet. This most likely could have been the type of ship that was there. But I'm going a little bit ahead of myself because people at the time thought that the Carver ship was Jacobson's ship, the Spanish, or not Jacobs, I'm sorry, the Juan de Iturbe ship. But Juan de Iturbe never, ever, ever went up the river. There's a report that everybody says that that's what they believe, and you can, if you go through this for decades, people have been writing about him. The reality is, in 1616, there's a report that he made it back to Acapulco with his ship. So how could that be? The only thing that people theorize is if you do lose your ship on land, and you do figure out a way to get back, and you got to go to your boss in Acapulco, and you got to turn around and tell him, "I lost the ship." "Did you get attacked by pirates?" "No." "Did it sink? What happened?" "Well, it's on land." "What?" They're not going to believe you. And back then, they would kill you sooner than look at you. They always thought you were ripping them off. So there's a belief that Cardona lied and said that he got back. And then later the ship was taken over by pirates and lost. That's a great thing to tell the Crown so you're not losing your rear end. But this is possibly when they talked to Carver, and they asked him point blank, what kind of ship was it? And he says, I'm not quite sure. And then Lucille said, well, was it a Viking ship? And he thought for a second and he goes, yeah, but why would that be there? So this is another thing. You've got stories on the west side, you have stories on the east side. It all ties into a Viking ship. A Viking ship could quite easily get up the waterways. It would not be a problem. The problem is once these guys got into this particular area, these big brutish people, they're not going to last in the desert. And they could have easily died along the way or who knows what. I think that's it, but try another one, Jill. Yeah. So where's the ship? Nobody knows. I've been part of 3 TV shows, Lost Ship of the Mojave and American Heroes Channel. We shot one for The Unexplained on the History Channel, and March, April, there's a show coming out called American Legends, which is a pilot, and it's all about the lost ship. You're never going to find a whole ship by any means. If you're lucky, you'll find a remnant. I've often said if I could find a piece of wood that dates back to whatever, 1600, 1000, I found the ship, I'm done. It's an interesting story. And instead of drinking in bars all night long, I can go hang out in the desert and have a good time. I can still bring the booze, though. So I hope you liked it. That's about it.